Melody Morgan is here with me. And so I'm going to do a little quick introduction of myself and then pass it over to Mel. And so as we're doing this and sharing a little bit about our experiences, if you guys would kind of let us know what school district you're with and what your role is. So for example, if you are a third grade teacher in Conway, you can just put Conway third grade teacher. I'll kind of give you a little bit of background on me real quick, Mel, and then I'll pass the mic. I just finished my 26th year in education. Started out at Pulaski Academy here in Little Rock, and I spent 4 years there as a high school math teacher. Transitioned to Greenbrier Public Schools, where I was in Greenbrier for 17 years, worked as a secondary math teacher, worked as an administrator in the high school. And crazy as it sounds, after 19 years of being in a high school, working in a high school setting, I became an elementary school principal. So went on a big learning curve when I had to learn elementary. That's a whole nother world. And so it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. It was a lot of fun. And I have been here at APSRC for 5 years. I just finished my 5th year here. And I'm one of the co-directors in teaching and learning. So Mel, I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Like Gina said, we're both at APSRC, and I'm the other co-director of teaching and learning. And Gina and I met, Gina, about 2 years ago today. And so we have really learned a lot together, as y'all can imagine, during the times that we've been in. I think I'm finishing my 26th year. It's like birthdays, we almost quit counting. But I have 12 years in public school at Highland, where I was a student and a graduate, and I went back to work there as a high school teacher, and I had a district level technology job, and eventually moved into leadership at the high school as the high school assistant principal. I have 6 years in the middle of that at the State Department. I was your state assessment director for a few years, and I've been heavily involved in accountability, and actually worked in the norms office for a while. I'm doing the No Child Left Behind work and calculations for our state, and then spent 6 years at Springdale on the district leadership team, and now I'm finishing my 2nd year at APSRC. So Gina and I hope that we can take all of that experience and dedication, because we both have that for y'all, and put it to good use and provide you a really good training opportunity. So thank you so much for joining us today.
The other thing we have in common is we have a really strong love for data. We love data. We love to dig into data, and we like to look at it with a teacher lens. We like to look at it with a leadership lens. And a lot of times we look at it kind of like with an overall general state lens. And so we hope that we have a lot to share with you on all of that today. So some of our essential learning questions that we hope to answer throughout our time together today are: why is it example? Why is it example? Why is it important to utilize student data to guide instruction? What are some commonly identified uses of data, and what is data-driven instruction? And so we have all these phrases that include data: data-driven decisions, data to drive instruction, data to inform. And so we hear these terms all the time, and we're going to kind of start from the ground up, and we're going to start really digging in and thinking about examples of data. So when we go out into the real world, into our lives, there are things and times that we collect data. So I'm going to ask you guys to kind of interact a little bit here. And so if you'll get your chat box ready, I want us to kind of think about, we're going to think about these one at a time. But some things we might collect, the data we might collect, might be weather information, including temperature and wind speed. So just in the chat box, if you will, just give us some examples of who might that be important to and why. Why might someone need to gather and collect the temperature or the wind speed? Just throw out some things. Definitely pilots. I would think they'd want to know. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Appreciate that. Plan a trip. Yeah, nothing worse than going to the beach and the beach is closed all week, right? Like that's terrible. Meteorologists. Sports teams, absolutely. Hadn't thought of that one. That was a new one, but yeah. Crop dusters. So we collect it. These are people that need it. And so why might they need it? What, in order to what? Like, so why would a pilot need to know the wind speed? Or why would a crop duster need to know the wind speed? Or why would the ball team need to know the temperature and wind speed? Another thing that we might collect is the height and weight each week. So if we're thinking about ourselves, why might it be important that we collect our own height and weight? What might that be for? Why would we do it? Height and weight, health, diet, right? I don't know about y'all, I'm tracking it all the time. Right. Medical reasons, typically, yes, a lot of times is why people do that is because they have some sort of medical issue or maybe a diet or purpose or whatever, but something you're tracking with your body and you have a reason to do it. So receipts. When I think about receipts, when I think about collecting receipts, I think about my taxes. Like I have a purpose for collecting those receipts, right? Like I need that documentation. But it could be, let's see if I can get my slide to change, just to balance the checkbook. Maybe I'm not following my bank and I just need to keep a hold of it. So here are some reasons. We might collect weather information in order to determine trends or maybe to predict weather patterns. And we might collect height and weight in order to examine our health choices. And we might collect receipts in order to balance the checkbook. So we want to think along these lines when we start talking about data that we collect in the classroom in order to do what? So a lot of times, actually just last week, I was in a school last week and somebody goes, oh, that's why we have that assessment. I give it, but I've never done anything with the information. And so what we want to think about today is what pieces of data are out there that we can collect in our classroom on our students in order to do what? So we got this little activity. We're going to do this little activity. And so I'm going to need everybody to grab a piece of scrap paper and a pencil because you're going to go into a breakout room and you're going to want this information when you get in the breakout room. So if you'll grab a piece of scrap paper and a pencil, we're going to do a variation of an activity called Give One, Get One. Now, if you all were in person, this would be an opportunity for you to get up, mingle around the room. You're going to have some time to think about your own. You're going to go mingle with other people and you're going to give an idea and you're going to get an idea from someone else till you fill in all the little spaces on your box, on your sheet. We're going to do a little variation of it. We have to change it a little bit for a virtual setting. So what I want you to do on your piece of scrap paper, I want you to draw a T-chart similar to this example here in the picture. And I'm going to give you just a minute or two to think about. I want you to record at least 3 types of data that you collect at school. So if your role at school is a classroom teacher, I want you to think about 3 types of data that you collect in your classroom. If your role is you are the media specialist, I want you to think about 3 types of data that you collect in the library. Okay, so everybody jot down, and I'll be quiet, I promise. I'll give you 2 minutes. I want you to just think about 3 pieces of data that you collect. Okay. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into a breakout room. And what I want you to do is I want you to take turns sharing the ideas from your list. You'll have about, so we need more than 3 rooms. What's our total number here, Mel? See your total number? 23, 20, 20?
21.
Let's do 5 breakout rooms, Ashley, if that's okay. If we can do 5 breakout rooms, that way there's should be around 4 people in every breakout room. And so you're going to take turns sharing ideas from your list. So rather than being able to get up, mingle around and go give one and get one, you're going to take turns giving one. And as the next person shares one of theirs, if it's not on your list, go ahead and get one from them. Take that and put it on your piece of paper. As you talk and as you give one, get one, as you go around through the whole bit with everybody sharing all together, I want you to identify the 3 that were most talked about. Which 3 were mentioned more than any of the others, most common between everyone in the group. You're going to identify a reporter in your breakout group. And when we return to the whole group discussion, the reporter is going to share your 3. And we're going to give you some time to talk about this so that you can figure out what those common ones are, the most common ones are among your group. And so we're going to go into breakout rooms for 7 minutes and give you a chance to talk. Okay, so make sure everybody shares one at a time, go around, share all 3, come up with the top 3 most common, and make sure someone is identified as the reporter.
And if you're not familiar with breakout rooms, I think Ashley's going to put you in them, correct, Ashley?
Yes, I will open up and you should have a little pop-up that comes up that tells you you are being assigned to a breakout room, and you just click join. After the allotted time, I'll close the breakout room, and it usually gives you about a minute to either go ahead and come out of your breakout room, or if the time runs out, it will automatically put you back into the main room.
And another good thing that you just made me think of, Ashley, you might want to pay attention to what room you're in, because we'll call the reporter for room 1 and the reporter for room 2. So make sure you know which breakout room you are going into. Okay, so go have this conversation, come up with the 3 most common, and we'll come back together in 7 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back. Welcome back.
So while they're coming in, I have a side note. I see that, and she's still in room 2, Teresa Crutchfield was my son's kindergarten teacher at Fordyce Elementary.
How fun.
She's still in her breakout room, so I just noticed her name.
How fun. You have to say hi to her.
So Gina, I was going through the list and we have such a diverse audience here.
Mm-hmm.
We have elementary, we have secondary, we have specialists in literacy. It's really, really diverse for us today, which is really good.
It is diverse, and I'm hoping the breakout rooms turned out to be pretty diverse too, and we could talk about that data and have those data conversations. So I'm counting on our reporters for each one of the rooms, and we'll start with we'll go backwards. How many rooms did we have, Ashley? We have, what did we say? 5?
We had 5 breakout rooms.
Yeah, let's start with room 5. We always start with 1. Let's go from 5 down. Who was the reporter in room 5? If you will unmute and go ahead and give us your 3. And Mel, do you want to type them in the chat so we can keep up?
Oh, sure. Erica's going to talk, I think. So
Yep.
I don't even know that we came up with 3. I was the gen ed science teacher last year. For the last few years, the one lady in my breakout room was the reading interventionist, and then we had a SPED supervisor. So,
well, how nice is that? It's a diverse group.
We said that we all had goals. That basically is what we had in common. We just have a different path of how we get there course, in the gen ed classroom, mine was more in the form of test scores and grades. And my goal was basically my standards, running records. CBAs were probably a common between me and the SPED supervisors. And then the reading interventionist, of course, she has tons of data, fluency tests, running records, phonics, screeners. And then the SPED supervisor, goal progress monitoring and performance levels are a big. So ours all looked different.
Yeah, that's a pretty diverse group there on roles, right? Like,
So,
that's a
yeah.
pretty, but I did hear test scores, okay, right, I heard running records. And so I think a lot of times like that progress monitoring piece could probably encompass several of those
Yes.
different things. And so I like it. Thanks, Mel. Thanks for capturing that.
I'm not sure I caught it correct. Was it CBAs?
Yes, classroom-based assessments.
Okay, we got so many different acronyms, so I was making sure.
Good, good. Okay, how about room 4?
Good job, room 5.
Yes.
All right, from room 4, we have what we found in common were our looking at our test scores from the previous year, and like
Summative test scores, you're talking about state summative test scores?
Yes.
Okay.
And then looking at our grades and looking over those, and then we felt like we might not realize it, but looking at our formative assessments, exit tickets, just even observations, daily observations, and gathering data from that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And daily observations, those are formative assessments, right? Like that's keeping that pulse on your class at that time based on your observations. So yeah, those are great. Great. Love it. I'm glad you brought in that formative piece.
Good job, room 4.
Room 3.
Hi. We had several, we had a special ed teacher, I teach ALE, we had a virtual teacher and a speech language path. So we had, our common thing was a lot of the hearing and screening data, IEPs and attendance for our students. It's kind of what we had in common.
Interesting. So think about that. Think about the hearing.
Sorry, guys.
Hearing screening. Hearing, the health screening, the visual.
Yeah, the health screenings.
Mhm.
Interesting. And then the IEP data and the attendance data. Attendance data is pretty important. Like we know if kids aren't coming to school, they're not engaged in our activities. They're not, much less likely to be learning at that time if they're not coming to school. Good job.
Good
Right,
job.
room
We
2.
had a great discussion.
Yeah. Room 2.
Okay, so we had a wide diverse group as well. A couple of us used NWEA MAP, common formative assessments as well, DIBELS passed any of the dyslexia screening, and we also use a lot of the behavioral data for our kiddos who may have IEP goals or maybe on behavior plans. So those behavioral data to help collect to see our next steps for that.
Absolutely. I love that.
Okay, I got NWA MAP data, CFA, screeners, behavioral data. What did I miss?
That was it.
Oh, okay, good. Well, we know I'm struggling to type as a former business teacher, but there we go. Good job, room 2.
Yeah, that looks good. I like it. There's that formative piece again. All right, room 1.
We had NWA scores, reading fluency checks, transportation,
Oh,
DIBELS, NWA skills check, student interest inventories, back to school student data, when you gather the information about their parents, their address, phone numbers, all those kind of things, ACT Aspire, CFAs, and something called iReading Diagnostic.
iReading or iReady?
Could be ready.
Yep. Okay. So Mel, you capturing all that?
I think
I
I
can
did.
say it again slower if she wants.
I think she got it. Thank you for that though. Good job, room 1. Okay.
Job.
So looking at this list that Mel has put in the chat from all the rooms, and we think about this and we think about instruction. And we look at what popped up in the different rooms, and I love that the rooms had such a variety of roles, because I think that pulls out a lot of data that a lot of times we don't think of when we go and talk to somebody that does something completely different than we do. But a lot of times we can stop and go, how could I use that piece of information? Oh, I could, maybe I could use attendance data, or maybe I can use that hearing screening data for some reason. So, I mean, it just gives us something else to kind of spark our thoughts. But when we look at this list, let's see if we can come up, it is a data rich group. Let's see if we can come up with a list of our top favorite 3 to guide instruction. So Mel, anything? I see the formative piece quite a bit.
Let me look over them again.
Anybody else in the chat, or if you want to turn your mic off and kind of talk, we're going to narrow it down to 3 because we're going to do another activity with it. We're going to get real specific on how we can make it, use it to help guide instruction.
One that stands out to me is
Yep.
screeners, and it's lots of different types of screeners, but I'm seeing lots of screening data.
Yep. We've got some people in the chat saying NWEA assessment data, which is growth data. Common form, there's a formative assessment. So we've got some screeners. We've got some formative assessments. NWEA data. I think let's use NWEA as its own, Mel, because, and here's why. I want to throw this out here. I told you this, I was talking to someone in a school that I was in last week, and it was actually the NWEA exam that the teacher wasn't sure what she was supposed to do with the data. So she didn't use it. So I think maybe we'll go ahead and leave that one on there.
Sounds good.
Okay, so you want to come up with our 3, and here's what we're going to do. I'm going to bounce out of this. I'm going to bounce out of this presentation mode, and we've got this other chart. And now we're going to think about, now that we know what we're going to collect, we're going to come up with 3 WEA data. And there may be some people on here that aren't familiar with NWEA. It is a growth assessment. It's a growth tool, and it's one of the 4 K2 assessment vendors that the state then opened up for K8. A lot of schools will purchase it for 9, 10 as well and use it as their growth tool for K10. So what are the 4? iReady, iStation, NWEA,
Renaissance Star.
and Renaissance Star. Those are the 4. So all of you have one of those 4 in your K2 for sure, because every school has to have one of the 4. And a lot of your schools are going to use one of those 4 K8 since the last, when they expanded that and let you get that free. And then some of you are going to have that growth tool for K10. So when we put NWEA data, we mean a growth tool assessment data. Okay. But since it was mentioned so many times, we'll just kind of think of it as NWEA data. What was the
Jeannie,
other
I
one we were
put
going
map
with?
growth because there's so many different pieces of NWA now. They have such a suite of measures.
We
You
put
might
growth.
gotta put map growth. That's what most
Yeah.
everybody, which is your interim piece, your NWA map growth data. Yeah.
It could be any of the assessments. It doesn't have to be NWEA. We just heard that one a lot. So it's just your growth data tool, basically. Okay, what was another one we were going to put on here? Formative assessments.
Yes. And they call
And I'm
them,
going to take off the word common, and I'll tell you why. A lot of times we depend on that word, depend on that acronym CFAs for common formative assessments. But that implies that you have another person to be common with. A lot of our schools in the state of Arkansas have singletons. And if you're a singleton, if you're the only kindergarten teacher in your whole building, you're not going to have anybody to be common with. So we're just going to think about formative assessments that may be common in your building, but it could also be just any type of formative assessment. So a minute ago, I forget who said it. Room 4. I forget who the reporter was in room 4. I'm so sorry. But she talked about observations. Observations are a form of formative assessment. You're watching for the kid's reaction, maybe. Maybe you're watching for who can do this strategy versus this strategy. So those are all formative because they're informing you, the teacher, on where the child is in their learning. So we're gonna just use the words formative assessments here. Pretty general. And then the third one, what was the third one we decided on, Mel?
There's a lot of
Classroom-based assessments or screeners?
screeners were really reoccurring in here, screeners.
All right, let's stick with screeners. So here's the beauty in this. We have no idea to know how this is gonna, this activity was gonna turn out. So we didn't know what these 3 things were gonna be. So what we're gonna ask you to do now is we're gonna ask you to focus on these 3 things. You're gonna go back to your breakout room. Ashley, I'm not sure if that's the same people or if it will be different people. Do you know?
Whichever you prefer.
Oh, we can do it with the same people?
Yes.
Okay, let's do, since they've all met.
Okay.
If we can put them back in the same group. Now what I want you to think about is if you collect growth data, and by the way, your growth tools give you that data, you give it 3 times a year. That's beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year. If you collect that growth data, why do you collect it? So the next question is, in order to what? In order to do what? Okay. If you're going to collect some formative assessment data, whatever that formative assessment may be, could be a bell ringer, could be an exit slip, could be those observations, could be a CFA that maybe you've built a task that everybody in the 3rd grade is going to take to see if we have mastered this skill. But if you're going to get data on formative assessments, what do you do with it? In order to do what? And the same thing with screeners. So those of you that are not sure what screeners are, remember I was a high school math person and went to the elementary. I learned a lot about screeners. We give screeners for a lot of different reasons. We give screeners for reading to find out, where we are, but for dyslexia characteristics, we look for characteristics of dyslexia with screeners. When they're little bitty, we give a lot of dibbles. Right? So a lot of you have heard of dibbles. I'd never heard that phrase before I became an elementary school principal. That's a very funny story. But we give dibbles. We might give, somebody mentioned the past assessment. We might have to go through and do that one. I forget the other screeners that I heard. I think of a lot of screeners when I think about our IEP data. We have to do a lot of screeners there. So if you're giving a screener, why? In order to do what? So we're going to send you back into your breakout rooms. And I'm going to give you 9 minutes here because I'm going to give you 3 minutes on each one for you to all come up together as a group on the response. NWEA growth data, why do you collect it? Formative assessments, why do you collect it? Screeners, in order to do what, right? Okay, so here we go, back to the same group. We'll do 9 minutes, 3 minutes a question. And actually, we may change that time, but let's start with 9.
Start with 9. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, here we come back to the main room. Welcome back, welcome back. Almost made me think of that theme song to Welcome Back, Kotter. Welcome back. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna share out. So I want the reporters again to kind of just give us a real quick summary of in order to do what. And so we're going to start with even rooms and then we'll go to odd rooms. So we're going to start with room 2's reporter. And as you tell me why we need the growth data, I'm going to type it in this document as we go. Room 2 reporter.
That's me. Sorry, I thought you said.
Yep.
Okay, so what we said for the growth data, Some of it is to determine how our essential standards, if our essential standards are being met. Our interventionists use it to really dig down skill by skill. Our classroom teachers can drill down skill to skill into that growth data to determine what their next steps need to be. And it can become very individualized for students and then be transferred to either another program, whether it's Lexia or iReady or ST Math. It can be then really individualized for that kiddo.
So basically, make sure I'm hearing you right. You talked about to determine if essentials are being met, drills down to skill by skill, and helps drive your interventions.
Yes, yes.
Love it.
Gina and I learned a new strategy yesterday. I don't know that it's new to y'all, but we're practicing it, aren't we, Gina?
Which part? Oh, the paraphrase.
Paraphrase passport.
Yes. Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you for that, Lindsay. I appreciate that. Okay, room 4.
All right, that was really great. Ours was very simple, and we just said that it just shows growth from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, but we also can see from year to year the growth.
So would it be valid for me to say shows growth through the year
Yes,
as well as from year to year?
yes, ma'am.
Okay. That's good. So through the year is something that Mel and I do. We do a lot of talking about through the year data. And that's that beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of year. It's that through the year data where in the past, you think about the old days, we got one big summative assessment at the end of the year. We need that through the year data to help drive that instruction so that we know what that summative assessment outcome is going to be before they ever take it, right? We want to know that before they get there. Perfect. All right, let's go with odd numbered rooms. How about room 1?
Room 1, we said to track growth and compare to progress with peers.
So
What's
what-
average?
I'm sorry, what was your very first word?
Track growth.
Track, got it, okay.
And then
compare to their peers?
compare their progress to their peers. Like if 50 is average, you can see if you are below, above. It's used to determine which students look like they would qualify for gifted programs, things like that.
Yeah, so I mean, you can do all kinds of differentiation once we have that ability. Once we can compare to peers, we can start doing some homogeneous grouping and do some differentiation that way. So that's great because I heard you say like GT and gifted and talented, that kind of thing. Okay, room 3.
Gina.
Yeah.
One thing that NWA does really well with the growth piece that she's talking about there is that comparison allows them to know what expected growth is.
Oh, you want me to add that? Expected growth. Okay. Thank you for that, Mel. All right, room 3.
Our main thing that we had was just to see if the children are progressing along the route that they should, or if they're falling behind.
Pretty important, right? Progressing or not progressing. And we get this information through the year so that we have that so we can step in and intervene, right? There's that word, intervene, for interventions. Perfect. All right, room 5.
Sorry, had to unmute. We said we use it to track that individual growth and kind of monitor progress, and also to group kids.
Good answer. That's great.
Perfect. Oops, I can't move that up for some reason. I guess maybe I have to do this. Yep, there we go. Okay, that looks great. I mean, like that's right. I mean, growth data. I don't think I have anything that I can add to this that they didn't say. Mel, did you see anything that they didn't say on that growth piece?
Looks really good.
You guys all talked about the individual, the importance of the individual and those of you that were in the ESSA training, you guys know that we have to look at the individual growth. We have to look, because that's how our growth is calculated. It's based on every single individual. Okay, let's do the same thing for formative assessment. So just some sort of formative assessment. Let's this time start with room. Let's start with room 3.
Our main formative assessment is we use it to plan instruction.
Good job.
The plan instruction. So tell me more about your conversation. How do formative assessments help us plan instruction?
We can plan whether the students are understanding the topic. We can move forward. If they're not, then we can have them work with each other, work with them, basically to get them back on track. And we don't want to go ahead and they don't know what they're learning yet.
So you're talking about the need to possibly reteach. You might have some students that you notice in that formative assessment that need to be retaught. So you don't just go on ahead and leave them behind.
Yes.
Or cause a bigger gap for that student, right?
Yeah.
So I love it. So plan instruction, reteach, or move ahead, or you said something about working together right there. Maybe they just need more work right where they are. Okay. Thank you for that. You were room 4, right, Jessica?
3.
3, thank you. I don't even know where I'm at now. I'm going all different directions. So let's go room 4.
All right, we said that formative assessments show if students have obtained a skill that leads toward mastery. And then the teachers can then reflect and also see which students need remediation.
Show if obtained skill that leads to mastery. And then the second one was what?
And then the teacher would then reflect on their teaching.
Oh, boy, that's huge.
And then also see which students need remediation.
Oh, that is a pretty powerful response on that teacher reflect on teaching, right? Because that's what that formative assessments are for us, the classroom teacher. So we give them so that we have the information that we can go back and think about our teaching. And that's that instruction, it's in curriculum, it's the strategies, it's everything that we just did. Did it work? Did it not? Did my neighbor's strategy work and mine didn't? Like what do I need to do differently? What do I need to change? And then identify remediation needs. I'm gonna throw this out here. That always makes me think intervention. And I always say this, I love this because I think it's a very true statement, but I believe enrichment is an intervention. So when we say remediation, we want to make sure we're also thinking about the other end. We might want to think about identify intervention needs and think about that enrichment piece at the same time, which I'm sure that's what you meant. I mean, like, that's usually what we're talking about when we're talking about identifying those things. Great, thank you for that. How about room 5?
Formative assessments. I'm gen ed teacher, so this is in science, this is really one of the things that I depend on a lot, but it should drive instruction, slow down, speed up, reteach. Maybe they can handle a harder concept. We can go ahead and push the boundaries a little bit. That's just all of your day-to-day information.
So is that valid for me to say this based on what you said? Formative assessments should drive the speed and depth of instruction?
Yeah.
I mean, how fast or how slow?
Or
how
reteach,
deep or
if
how?
we just, reteach if they need more.
Great. I have to tell you all a story. My Robert in my life, he likes to work on vehicles in there's a meaning behind the madness in the story, I promise. He likes to work on vehicles in his spare time. And I know nothing about that, and literally nothing. And one day he came in and was excited because he got this truck running, and he was telling me all about it and what he did and all this stuff. And this was my response. What? Because independently, I understand all those words. I mean, I understand the words. I have a definition for them, but when you put them together in that whole sentence in that paragraph, it just went over my head. I didn't get it. And I went, what? You know what he did? He said the exact same thing really loud. And all I could do, because it just made me mad, right? Because now he's just saying the same thing loud. If I didn't understand it the first time, I don't understand it louder. And so I was like, oh, you would make a terrible teacher. You just make a terrible teacher. Because we know as teachers that if we reteach it, we have to say it differently than the second time than we did the first time, and not just louder, right? Louder doesn't work. So I just always love telling that story on him, because that's what he did. He just yelled at me because I didn't understand. All right, let's go to room 1.
We said identify mastery levels and areas of need.
Love it. So we're really getting the same. We're getting the same response every time, right? Like that's what we're doing. We know that it's helping us think about what we need to do different. We're identifying kids. We're looking at the individual needs. That's what the whole purpose of those formative assessments are. Great. Room 2, what did you guys say?
So we said pretty much the same things. It's an inform your instruction to reteach or enrich or extend their learning. Definitely that's a grow for our school, is that extension and enrichment piece. If they already have it, why are we even teaching it to them again?
Right.
Let them do something different or make it more intense for them. So and then the interventions, it's always going to go back to those if they need those intervention pieces.
Love it. Okay, so for the sake of time, Mel just text me, tell me I got to move a little faster. So for the sake of time, we're going to stop at just 2, because here's what I want us to think about real quick. And Mel, if you don't think we have time to do this little piece, we'll go over what I want them to think about. But this is part of it. Like, this is what we do. We talk about the data we collect. We all know data we collect. We all know why we have to collect it. You guys are the experts. You guys put your heads together. This is beautiful. Like, there's nothing that I could add that you didn't add, that you didn't say here, right? Like, you know why we're collecting it. But there is an additional step. And that additional step is, if we collect this, in order to do this, and we do this, what should the outcome be? What should our then, THEN, be? Why are we doing all this? What is that final outcome? This is kind of the part where we get to planning for our instruction, but then we have to do it. We have to put it in place. And how do we know that we've done well? So here's an example of one that has been fully mapped out. And you can see this would take some time, but what I want you to know is this is about special education and special education training. And it's been completely mapped out from here's the data we're going to collect in order to do this. And now we're going to get to all the thens. The thens are the outcomes. What are the results of our work? What should we see in the end? So if you'll look at this example real quick, I want you to notice that this group that worked on this project said, you know what, if our system, our school, provides training and technical assistance on strategies for appropriate collection, analysis, interpretation, and use of data to drive instruction in the classroom. There's a lot in that piece, right? Like, we do a lot of things in school that we don't always get the appropriate training and technical assistance for. So they're going to actually provide all the training and technical assistance on strategies. Then what will the outcomes be? And look at all these outcomes. There are 6 in the middle section. Okay, think about the SPED team. Think about making sure that training and technical assistance for all those strategies for gen ed teachers, for that inclusive setting. Look at the very first one. IET meetings will be more effective in identifying student strengths and needs. Right? You don't have to say anything, but you may have gone through an IEP meeting before where it just didn't feel like we were really getting to that student's individual strengths and needs. Maybe we were kind of keeping it really general, right? Another thing that would be an outcome, students' progress and achievement of the curriculum standards could be accelerated. They might be progressing through them a little bit faster if we really get that appropriate training on those strategies down. Educators will use data correctly to inform instructional decisions. Student accountability measures will demonstrate growth. Overall, in the last column, look at what they're thinking is going to happen overall. An increased percentage of students with IEPs will benefit from education in general education settings for a greater percentage of their school day. And that's what we want. That's what we hope for. So that's what this process can look like, which is why we have this slide, which we were going to go back to this one. We would look at NWEA growth data. If we collect NWEA growth data, in order to do all these things, in order to determine if essentials are being met, in order to know who's growing through the year, in order to track that growth and compare them to the others, in order to see who's progressing and who's not progressing, in order to monitor their progress, in order to group students, then what? What should that result be? What should the overall end outcome be? And so that is that next piece, and that's this slide 12, which I think you all are going to get the slide deck here, that if we do those things, if we collect that data in order to meet that need, then what should the outcomes look like? Like, what should we be seeing? And if we're not, then we have to adjust that instruction to get to that, to where we can see that. Okay, so Mel is saying we need a break. Let me give you guys a break.
Gina, we could forego our break and do this in the breakout rooms. We could I think that would be really beneficial.
Do the break / this together.
I think this would be really good for them to pivot to the breakout rooms the way you had planned.
Okay. We can do it. And what was the next one? Formative assessments.
Yes.
Okay. Thinking about all the reasons that we have on this chart in order to, what should those results be? What should the then be? What should the final outcome be? And we want to think about that. It might be a stepping stone to a big picture. It might be 2 stepping stones, and it might be 2 big pictures. I mean, you guys can talk that out and decide. Okay. So do we want, what'd you just say, Mel, about the break? I'm so sorry.
Why don't they're trying to come up with an outcome of growth data and formative assessments. Let's give them 3 minutes in their breakout room on each one of those. And we'll return them to the main group, and then we'll take a 4-minute break.
Take the break right then.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's do 5 minutes in your room. That gives you 2.5 minutes on each one of these to think about that. Is that enough time? Think that'll be enough time?
Can you screenshot and share slide 14? Excuse me.
Slide 10.
Yes, so that they have that in their breakout rooms.
Did you ask Ashley that?
Yep, I got it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Okay. All right, we're good. We're on track. So we'll do this. We'll go to breakout rooms for 5 minutes. Think about the 2 thens for each one of these, having that picture in your breakout room. And when we come back to the main room, then we'll take our break.
Okay, I just posted that file in the chat if anyone needs to grab it before I open the rooms.
Oh, good. Nice.
Thanks,
Thank
Ashley.
you.
I think that was the correct one. It had data, some.
Was it this one?
information.
It had
Yes,
the
it
in
was
order
that one.
to?
Yes.
Okay.
All
Got
right, I'm
it.
gonna open up the rooms for you. And we're doing 5 minutes, you said?
Yeah, I think 5 minutes would be good. Okay, we're coming back, coming back. That's okay, Jean. We saw that. We knew you had gotten disconnected. Technology, it's great when it's working. Okay, welcome back, welcome back. I can imagine what your conversations just sounded like, because that is a struggle. That's the struggle to think about. A lot of times we talk about what data are we going to collect. We may not do that next step of what are we going to do with it? Like I hear it, right? I have that information, but I really don't do anything with it. So in order to do what? So then we have to do what that is. Like we have to identify in order to do what we do that work, that there should be a result of that work. And so we have to get to where we can verbalize what is that final result. And so these are the steps that we take to get to that step. I'm going to take 2 answers to the then for just growth data. Does anyone have a then that they would, any one of the rooms, would anybody be willing to share their overall then for collecting that growth data?
Students will have increased levels of proficiency.
Anybody? Brave soul, willing to share?
Students will have increased levels of proficiency.
Okay, start over. I missed the very first part.
Students will have increased levels of proficiency and mastery.
What was the next word? I heard mastery.
Proficiency, mastery, either one.
I gotcha. Of efficiency and mastery. Perfect.
I think she
That's-
said proficiency.
I
Proficiency.
did, but it's okay.
Oh, I gotcha. Proficiency and mastery. Perfect.
Good job.
That's great. That is the then. That's why we're doing that. That's that whole purpose. That's great. Anybody else have one you want to share?
I'm being spared. I'm along the lines of students showing growth as opposed to regression. They're growing, making progress, because in SPED, we do not want to see the regression side. You know, students going backwards or moving forward, which lets us know they're retaining something.
Absolutely. I think that is, I just have to tell you, I'm loving the balloons in your background. Best mom, that's great. I think that's absolutely a final outcome. Why would we collect growth data? Because we want students to show growth. That's the business we're in. We grow kids, right? And we don't want just some students showing growth. We actually want, I'm going to go back, if you don't mind, and add a word here. You hear
Absolutely.
me adding the word all?
Yes,
We
yes.
want all students showing growth as opposed to regression, right? And making progress.
And it's a big deal because, you know, from the State Department, and when you start looking at data, those moving kids, and gets into the details of, the subpopulation groups, the ESL, the free reduced lunch, the SPED, if you will. So
It's almost as if we planted you for the next piece of our presentation. Isn't that right now? You just, that was the best transition we could have ever looked at. We're going to talk about that very thing. So I appreciate you sharing that. Did anybody have one on formative assessments that you want to share? Did we get that far? It's definitely a collaborative thing. This is something that we need our friends and our peers to talk about and to bounce these things off of. I don't know what I would do without Mel in my life, because we're so collaborative that we have to think together. And that's the same thing on coming up with these outcomes and really being that having that reflective practice. I need my friends and I need my peers and I need other educators that care about the profession that we are in, that want the very best for kids to go, okay, what could an end result be for the fact that we are doing these formative assessments and we're taking these checks and we're progress monitoring and we're getting these interventions? I almost feel like I could say this right here goes right here as well. Couldn't you, Mel?
Yes, and it may be more on the skill level that they see at the formative piece, but sure enough.
I mean, that's a pretty good end piece for why I would need to be doing these formative assessments. Like, that's what I want to see in the long run. And again, I think I could even do this, especially with formative. I think I could add this word. Increased levels doesn't necessarily mean that everybody will be proficiency or mastered, but we'll have increased levels towards proficiency and mastery, right? Because we're identifying those kids and we're making sure we intervene wherever those interventions happen. Okay, we are going to take a quick break because I am totally aware that I've kept you guys for an hour and 23 minutes. So we're going to do let me go back to present mode because Mel's so neat. Look what she's done. We're going to take a 4-minute break and we're going to come right back. And we are going to move into that next piece that June just led us right into. And Mel's going to take us through some other data.
I'm on mute. Well, thank y'all for honoring our break. I want to thank you again, and I want us to set this as this is a next step is actually to show you how to think of using data as part of a cycle or process. I mean, if we turn it into a science, I guess, Gina, all the great lead in that you did with this amazing group of leaders. I mean, classroom leaders, it's been amazing. So a lot of this information is new information for some classroom teachers. In many of your cases, it may be repetitive of what you've already shared through your brainstorming. But most importantly, I want to talk to you about thinking of data and data-driven instruction as a cycle, as a process that is ever going. It's a continuous cycle. Y'all hear that a lot. A continuous cycle that is in place to support student learning. And it begins with this right here, this little tan little piece, a collection recording of data. But it never stops. It's continuous, and it's something that needs to be automatic. It's something that should happen automatically. If you're a classroom teacher, if you're a grade level leader, if you're an instructional facilitator, a building principal, support, instructional support staff, this is a process that should be in place that you do as part of maybe your PLC work. One of the things that in my 26 years experience is we do some of these really well and others we just kind of run out of time or run out of steam to do. So I'm going to talk to you very quickly about this, and I'm going to put some emphasis on more areas than others. How does the cycle support student learning? And you guys have told us that you are very rich at knowing how to collect the data pieces and identify them and actually know how to use them. Some of the things that I drop in on this slide that you'll be able to take with you. By the way, I dropped a copy of today's presentation into the chat box for you to snag. Feel free to use it, share it, whatever you want to do. But the cycle itself helps inform educators of strengths and opportunities. It helps that at the building level, in a particular grade or classroom, and within a given subject. It informs PLCs of student growth and intervention needs. This is something you already told us. Informs, this is one I didn't really hear us talk about, informs professional development needs. So if you're a building leader or you're a lead teacher or an instructional facilitator who's actually trying to determine what to plan for that's meeting the needs of your staff, this is a good way to look at it. Informs teachers of what to teach. That was one that kept reoccurring in your share sessions. It informs instructional deficiencies and identifies curricular gaps. What's a curricular gap? Who wants to come off mic and share that for me, or pop it in the chat and let Gina read it? Who can define what a curricular gap is before we move on? Make sure we're all understanding that. Gina, do we have one in the chat?
I don't see anything in the chat.
No, a curricular gap might be that we had the greatest of intentions to teach something because our standards tell us to, but we don't get to it, or we don't plan for it adequately, or we don't teach it to the depth of knowledge that it needs to be taught so that students retain that from year to year. That's one example of a curricular gap. The cycle also supports students of what they know and where they need to go next. So like you guys were really great about talking about formative assessment. Oftentimes it tells us what they've learned, but it also tells us what they're ready to learn next, or what skills they have acquired and what skills they are ready to master next. It informs parents of student progress. That's one piece that I didn't hear come up earlier. It all begins with the data, and we're over here again talking about collecting that data, and these are many things that you guys came up with on your own. It's almost like you knew what was on my slide, Gina, as we were doing it. But the formative growth tools and assessments, spot on. Student inventories, I heard the breakout rooms come back and share that. Running records was mentioned as well. Observations of students' reading and writing behaviors, study and student writing samples, listening to student talk was shared, local teacher developed assessments, y'all called them classroom-based CBAs, and the interim. So this is just to kind of have a place, if you are at a loss of thinking through some of that, this is a good way to reflect and look back on some examples of the data pieces that you shared as well. So what are the data telling us? This is that red piece of the cycle, they analyze the data. How do we analyze the data? How do we look for patterns? How do we make comparisons? What do we look at to identify the strengths and the needs of the individuals, which many of you shared about that as the next thing after identifying the tool, the measure. Gina, they were really great at then taking it to the next step. How do we differentiate for the needs of individual students in an entire class? Lots of special ed lenses on today's training that have shared some great ideas on that. How do we know how individual students compare? It's important to know that we talked about the NWEA growth data, having a comparative lens to letting us know how similar students perform in a national norming sample to tell us what to expect as far as achievement and growth for students. What are some of the possible reasons for differences in the growth of individuals? Are we teaching to the middle? Are we teaching to one specific end or the other? Are there a reason why we're not accommodating all the individual needs of our students? Those are some of the questions that can come out of that when you analyze your data. How will the differences in the growth of individual students impact instruction? So this is where I always think about, there's lots of different ways, if you think of a pair of scissors, to cut up the data and look at it, but you have to not be afraid to get in there and actually do that. Break it apart. We call that disaggregation. It's just a fancy term for how do we break it down to see things that we might not see if we look at it collectively. How do we make informed instructional decisions? And I always say this slide is a really great reference or a planning resource to have as you're actually planning out your lesson plans or your pacing guides for the year. Things that you should ask yourself as you're planning your lessons is what literacy practices will be utilized to teach to the identified needs. Literacy is in all content areas, y'all. So how can you weave strategies in there to support that, regardless of the content you're teaching? What sort of grouping will allow for the best opportunity for students to learn? You guys hit that really good. You talked about how you use the data to actually inform ways to do grouping, flexible grouping, how to best be more efficient. Elementary teachers amaze me. I too was secondary, Gina, they amaze me at how they're able to have many, many groups going on at one time very effectively in their classrooms. But data helps them know who needs to be in which group receiving which intervention so that they can personalize that learning for all students. Will there be strategies for the whole class in small groups or individual one-on-one settings? Which method and grouping will be the most effective and efficient to meet the needs of my kids? It's not always the same with every group of kids from year to year. And if you're a secondary person, it's not always the same from class period to class period, what you have to think about as the strategies for your kids. It's very different depending on the group of kids you're serving. And oftentimes it's different based on the content that you're planning for. The needs for the same students in math may look totally different than the ones for reading or science. What specific standards, objectives, and skills will be taught? That's always important to make sure that you're addressing what you as a teacher and as a team and as a building have identified as your essential standards, essential work. And how do we teach on grade level material when no one's on grade level? Now, hopefully that isn't the case when we get our data back this summer, but we did have, a pretty traumatic couple of months there where it really impacted opportunity to learn for many students. And so that's a really big one when you have a lot of kids needing scaffolds and supports that maybe is different than what you have planned for in past years. So you're going to then, the next step, after you analyze the data, you're going to formalize an instructional plan. You're going to make instructional decisions and put them into a plan. You'll collaborate as teams, as I'm sure you do, co-teachers, PLC structures, to create instructional plans that lead to measurable outcomes and grow students' performance for all students. You'll include learning targets and how you'll know whether or not a student has learned it as an outcome. That'll be written in there in your plan. Incorporate research-based instructional strategies, which include scaffolds and support. You'll be thinking about necessary prior knowledge, and that is really critical now more than ever, because they may not have received that prior knowledge before they were promoted to the next grade. So there may be some essential skills that you have to go teach that are introduced that may not have gotten taught. And also consider the future connections that are going to be made when they move into the next grade level, or the next lesson for that matter. Provide core instruction of essential standards and skills, and include measurable action to collect evidence in student learning. So we've collected it, we've analyzed it, we do that pretty well. We use it to make decisions, we talk through all that, we create a plan, and then we do what is known as reflective practice. And that's why I said, Gina, it's so important for them to go in there and think about what is the purpose of why they're doing this, and what are they able to visualize the change or the outcome to be, so that it has more meaning as to why we're doing the work. And so that reflective practice is huge. Looking back, whether you do it on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a quarterly, an annual basis, but looking at whether or not you're on track, kind of like I'm doing right now at my watch, about whether or not I'm on track and respectful of your time, determining what is working and what is not. I mean, if it doesn't work, don't keep doing it. And figure out what you do need to do differently as you reteach. And sometimes at a secondary level, I did that from one class period to the next. Sometimes it was that in the moment. Do you observe enough evidence of student learning through your checks for understanding? That's that formative assessment. That's that piece where you're doing those daily or every other day moments that you're checking for understanding, so you know whether or not that needs to be adapted from one period to the next, one day to the next in your lesson plan. Do you observe evidence of student learning through direct application of student work? That one's really good. I see that as part of a regular practice with a lot of really great elementary teachers, Gina, in the evidence of what you see sent home for parents to process, to sign and return to school. So there's even that involving parents in that is really well. And do you hear and see evidence of learning in student classroom engagement? If we go in your classroom, is there one student answering all the questions, or do you have a method and process for engaging all your learners into that? So that's reflective practice. So what now what? This is like my favorite slide. This is also part of reflection, and it's thinking about using data to drive instruction as a cycle, this complete cycle right here that never stops. It goes on and on. It becomes like the sun's coming up and setting every day. Triangulation of data. Well, let's back up. This should really be a culture in your system. And it starts with every individual teacher valuing, using data-driven instruction as a process that's valid and reliable to make a difference for their kids. But seeing that as a actual culture in your school is huge. The triangulation of data is a term I wanted to point out, like how do the data reported align with what you're seeing in the classroom and on your local assessments? Actually look at all the data components together and not just in silos. Educators that model this process are able to produce evidence of responsive and differentiated teaching and learning, and it creates opportunities to replicate what's working, to remove what is not. I put that word in there, Gina, that we learned this year, to de-implement. We need help de-implementing things that are not working. I mean, if they're not tried and true and evidence-based and really making a difference with students, you should advocate to have that removed from the instructional time. What is not working and move the needle on student achievement and growth. So now we're going to do a little activity together. I'm gonna show you through the lens, and the data set that I have to show you on how to utilize student data happens to be 5-year trend data from the state level lens. So it's the performance of ACT Aspire since we started 2015. There's a gap in there. We know we didn't give an assessment in 1920, but each of these columns represents a year, and the percent proficient is this axis, and this axis here are the different grade levels, 3rd through 10th. But it lets you see how as a state we have performed on reading, not ELA, but reading specifically over time, 5 years to be exact, 6 calendar years, 5 years of assessment data in reading. When you look at these charts, you actually see the percentage of students in each grade across the state performing at or above the proficient level in reading across all 5 tested years. The data appears to show, when we look at it this way, when we triangulate or we present the data this way, it appears to show that the greatest decreases in state reading performance to be at grades 3 and 5, just because of this cliff that you see right here. This data can be very useful as a comparison for you as a classroom teacher or a building leader. It can also be used to determine whether or not you're performing at or above state average, or if you're performing below. It's that comparative piece like we talked about with our NWA growth data, having that as well for any grade level. And also if your students fell short of how the state performed, it helps to put in perspective programmatic changes. It also would help you to put into perspective impacts of COVID like we saw, or remote learning and that kind of impact. It lets you tell a story using your data over time. So classroom teachers could do that. But more importantly, it lets you look at it with respect to your small population in respect to that of a large population. Now I want to show you this same data that I used to create this chart. But now I'm just going to put the percentages in the column. So this is 3rd through 10th. This is still reading, and these are the percentages over time. Okay. Same information, just the numbers behind the graphs. Give you a minute to look at it. When you look at the cohort performance, now when I talk about cohort, when I look at the data of 3rd grade from 15 all the way through 21, and we don't have the 22 data yet, this is a different group of 3rd graders each year. Okay, so when I go across this line, Gina, confirm that you can see my pointer when I'm doing that.
We can see it.
Okay, that's good. When I go across this line, this is just showing you this was 3rd graders this year in our state, and the next year it's a different group of 3rd graders and a different group. But if I want to talk about it from the lens of a cohort, I have to think of a set of steps, like stairs, actually stairs going down. The only thing that makes it a little challenging is we're missing a year. So there's a year that we had students together that we didn't get measures on from summative data. So you can actually see when I told you before that when you were thinking about looking at the cliffs, that it looked like third and fifth grade actually had the greatest decreases in proficiency. But looky here. Look at 10th grade last year. Look at what 10th grade was. The yellow, the time before 10th grade that they tested together would have been as 8th graders, excuse me. As 8th graders, that cohort of students were proficient in reading just a little above 53%. They didn't get to test as 9th graders, and then they moved ahead as 10th graders. In 10th grade, that fell to 30.7% proficiency. And that was not quite revealed that way, just glancing at those charts. If that's the only way I aggregated my data together to look at it, to actually inform me of information, I might have missed this. But if I actually do a math formula here that allows me to do the absolute difference, I got to be careful, Gina's a math teacher, of these two here, the grade that experienced the greatest regression was 10th grade. This cohort of students had a regression of 22.4 percentage points in 2 years' time. So that gives you a different way to look at that. Let's look at math. I don't mean to depress us today because we're gonna be able to graph this hopefully this summer and see a different movement of our data. But here's math over 5 years. Did you look at that, including the skipped year? So just like in reading, the data appears to show the greatest decreases or drop in our state performance and math performance to be at grades 3 and 5 again. It seems like it's the largest drop, okay? State average performance in math has historically trended downward. I want to show you something. Look at that. Even before the pandemic hit, the overall performance from grade level to grade level has not been seeing a growth across the grade levels. It's been actually a downward trend in mathematics for our state, meaning the higher I am in grade level in school, the less proficient, the less chances my outcome is to be proficient. Do you notice any additional trends besides that when you look at that? That's a big one that I look at as a trend of performance. It's a concerning trend if you're a secondary person, because Gina knows math is often one of the earliest predictors of high school graduation success. So it's good to be able to look at data differently. Now look, when I pop it into the numerical piece, this lets you see same thing. However, we had really a lot of percentage point change when you look at it by cohort, particularly the 5th grade group. And that might not have been evident just kind of looking at that chart. They had over 27 percentage points change from the time they tested together in math as 3rd graders. The 4th grade year, there was no test for them. And then in 5th grade, they had 34.6%. So it's a lot. So what I tried to do is show you different ways to look at data. I picked the state level data set, but you can use the same kind of logic for your own classroom data, grade level data, building data. Lots of rich discussions can come from examining and analyzing data and digging deeper to identify patterns and trends within your school districts and schools, grade levels and classrooms, and as well as your subpopulation of students. So now we're going to collaborate.
That's a good way for us to make some decisions on, is it a curricular issue, an instructional issue? You might, that kind of at the leadership level.
I know I gave y'all the GT version of how to do some analysis, but it was just picking a data set that we're all vetted in. I mean, we all had contribute to that overall state performance data set. So it was letting you look at it and letting you see how you can present the data differently, break it apart. I just did some highlighting pieces in there and a little math formula out to the right to determine, wow, I might not have seen this if I hadn't looked at it that way. So right now, and I think I failed to tell you this when you went to break, but most all of us have our phones handy. it's time for you to pick up your phone. We're going to engage you in a little activity here at the end. I want to pop out of that. You're going to need your phone, and you're going to go to this web address up here at the top. Gina and I've learned this tool, and y'all may already know about it too. It's a really neat engagement tool for adults. I guess you could use it for students as well, but it's a really great engagement tool for adults. I want to back those words back, Gina. I can only imagine as a former high school assistant principal what this could reveal. However, as adults, go to menti.com and type in this code 20139739. And we're going to give you an opportunity to engage in another strategy that we do a lot as best practice as teachers, and that's doing like an exit slip or an exit ticket here at the close of our training. And I want you to go into the menti.com site, use the code, and nobody knows your response. Nobody knows who's sharing what, but I want you to share out how can analyzing grade level summative data over time benefit classroom teachers with instruction. And as you put that into your phone, it will start appearing here on the screen. We'll get to see everybody's responses in just a minute. I think, Gina, I have to go to the, I think I have to go to this level. I have to get out of that screen sharing too. Is anyone having troubles getting in? Gina, can you monitor the chat for me?
There's nothing on the chat.
Okay, good. I think they're just waiting for me to share. Okay, we're getting a pulse check here. One user shares that by analyzing grade level summative data over time, how can that benefit classroom teachers? It will identify weaknesses along the vertical alignment, great answer, and allow for instructional alignment. That is wonderful. To know their incoming students' needs, trends over time. Good job, guys, really good. Teachers can use the data to reflect on their own teaching. Great. Teachers can use that data to identify areas of growth and adjust their teaching. Curriculum, oh, bingo, that was the one I had written down. Curriculum gaps and or teaching gaps, weak areas. Good job. Let's scroll up a little bit. Teachers are able to work in PLC meetings and determine levels of mastery and need and develop targeted lessons. That's great. It will show classroom teachers what is working and is not working in the classroom. Reflection, perfect. Couldn't have said that any better, could you, Gina?
That's right. Love seeing that
Teachers can
reflection.
plan effective instruction and group students accordingly. Great job. To know incoming student needs. Analyzing grade level data summative will enable teachers to close learning gaps, inform them about their instruction, and identify instructional gaps. Great. Analyzing grade level summative data over time and help teachers to drive their instruction and help close gaps. Good job, guys. Yeah. And it's even possible with your summative data to do that disaggregated piece and look at underserved cohorts or subpopulations. I think that's what you're speaking to when you talk about deficiencies and weaknesses, equity issues. Good job. Okay, we're going to go to another question now. Here's the next one. I think you can actually get to this one on your phone now that I've popped it forward. If not, someone tell me. It should automatically move the one forward on your phone. What other ways could you disaggregate student performance data to identify instructional strengths or weaknesses? Take a minute.
Ashley just said if you clicked off of Mentimeter, go back to menti.com and re-enter the code.
It's the same code, 2013-9739. Thanks, Ashley. I'm getting results. I love this tool because it's collaborative. Oh, well, I'm not able to get to my next one. Hang on. I tested that earlier.
If you just click present in the top right corner,
Yeah.
and then you should be able
Oh,
to.
it brought that one up. So sorry.
Yeah. That's okay.
Yep. The only thing, Ashley, is when I was in present mode, it wouldn't bringing up their information before. See, I
I
have-
didn't notice your settings of if it was,
I have data in there, but it's not allowing me to advance to that one. Yeah, there is results in it. I just want to be able to see them. Link to the live results. Should work. It's not taking me to.
typically, if you have it presenter led, you'll need to go into your presentation and go to the second slide that you want them to see.
Oh, in present mode.
You mean present from in here,
Yes.
but it says it's currently presenting. Is that here? Oh, I've only got one, curricular gaps in instruction. Here we go. Separate. It might have just had to calibrate. I don't know why it was so.
Sometimes it does that, especially in presenter mode, because you have to
Yeah.
move forward before they'll ever be able to see the prompt to enter anything.
So as you think about other ways you could disaggregate student performance data to identify strengths and weaknesses with instructional planning, curricular gaps, separate by individual skills to see data for specific areas. These are great answers. This down here, this little person will usually pop up and let you know when someone has submitted. But guys, y'all have been great participants today. I think we've shared a lot. We're able to capture these and then actually use them just like you do. Gina and I can actually capture these and use these formatively to help us address our instructional planning with you in future presentations that we do. Isn't that correct, Gina?
That's right.
It is. It makes a big difference when we get feedback from you as practitioners in the field. We have put our name and number and emails up here. We welcome any questions you have. I did put a copy of the presentation earlier, linked to today's presentation a little earlier up there. We're going to try to really honor your time and stop on time. So thank you all so very much.
Thank you so much. You guys have been great today.